start with asking students to scan the QR code, if that's okay. Hi everyone. So we haven't officially started, but it's 11 o'clock. For those who are attending the module Gender, Sexuality, and Media, can you scan the QR code to register your attendance? Other people don't have to scan the QR code. So this QR code is only for students who are on the module Gender, Sexuality, and Media, because this is a joint event between the Department of Cultural Media Visual Studies that I teach in, and also a public event for University of Nottingham's LGBT History Month. So scan the QR code where you can, if you are a student who's taking this module. But don't worry if most of you, this is not relevant to some of you. Has everyone scanned the QR code? There will be another chance during the break to scan the QR code if you miss this one. This is only for students who are taking this module, Gender, Sexuality, and Media. Okay, so I'll close the QR code and then switch to today's main lecture slides. Hi, welcome everyone. So welcome to University of Nottingham LGBT History Month special event. Today we're very honored to have our guest, Mr. David Edgley, with us. David Edgley is from Nottinghamshire's Rainbow Heritage. He's going to share his experience and research about UK's queer history, with a particular focus on Nottingham. So David will also introduce what the Rainbow Heritage does, and there might be some kind of interactive activities. So the floor is yours, David.
Yes, my name is David Edgley, and I'm a volunteer on Nottinghamshire Rainbow Heritage, which is our local LGBT plus or queer history project. I might add that I am an ex-student of Nottingham University. I left in 1967. You can do the maths over that. So what I'm dealing with today is in two parts. The longer part will deal with how the laws of this country have affected queer people. And it will end with a look at hate crimes, homophobia, biphobia and transphobia, and how those things have forced an awful lot of people to stay in the closet, as we say. There will then be a break. And then after the break, the shorter part will look specifically at Nottingham, and I will hope to justify the title of this event, Pushing Above Its Weight. It's up to you to judge whether I do that or not. But before that, I want to mention these things here. These are the newsletters that Nottinghamshire Rainbow Heritage produces. Bi-monthly newsletters, not Rainbow Review, but also occasionally extras that come out when there are things that miss the deadline. Now, they are virtual newsletters. They're sent out by email, but I've had some printed and they are there. So if during the break or at the end of the session you want to look at those and possibly even sign up for the email list, you're very welcome to do that. But we move on to the first part, and that is the laws which have affected LGBT plus people. And if we look at those laws, there are a huge number of punishments and penalties that have been handed down over the years, and here are some of them. You could be hanged, burnt at the stake, guillotine. You could experience the wrath of God, stoned to death, electric shock treatment, imprisoned, banned from all sorts of activities, and then of course there were the gas chambers. And in the 13th century they buried you alive, and that's where we'll start. There is this ecclesiastical law, sodomites to be buried alive. Well, it was an ecclesiastical law, and I'm not sure whether it was actually put into practice, but something which was certainly put into practice was Henry VIII's buggery law. There you see it. If you're convicted, you will suffer the pains of death. But Henry had other ulterior motives, because if he could get somebody convicted, he could take the lot. He could take the money, he could take the houses, he could take all the belongings. Now that law stayed in place well into the 19th century, and the last people who were hanged were in 1836, and the law disappeared in 1861. I want at this stage to draw your attention to a relatively new book by the MP Chris Bryant, and it's about James Pratt and John Smith, who were those last two people who were hanged under that law. But that law disappeared and another one materialised, and it was the law relating to gross indecency, sometimes called the Labouchere Amendment, after the chap on the left, Henri Dupré Labouchere, French name, English MP. And what Labouchere wanted to do was introduce a law that criminalised certain activities between men and also criminalised certain activities between women. And this is where Queen Victoria comes in, or not, as the case may be. The story may well be apocryphal, but the story is that Labouchere's suggestions were taken to Queen Vic for the royal assent, and she said, ladies, don't do that sort of thing. So the law only ended up applying to men. And 10 years later, the chap on the right, who is he? Oscar Wilde, was imprisoned for gross indecency, 2 years hard labour in Reading jail. Now in 1921, an MP called Frederick McKiston thought that Labouchere should have got his way. The law should have applied to women. But Lord Birkenhead, there he is in the top hat, said 999 women out of 1,000 haven't heard a whisper of these practices. In other words, he would say, let's not put ideas into women's heads. But a woman who did want to put ideas into women's heads was the magnificent Marguerite Radcliffe Hall. There she is. And she wrote the book The Well of Loneliness, which is about lesbians and lesbianism. The editor of the Sunday Express said, I would rather give a young person a phial of prussic acid than let them read this book. This is a book that should be banned. Prussic acid is a solution of HCN, hydrogen cyanide. I have a degree in chemistry, you know. Well, yes, the book was banned. But I feel if the book hadn't been banned, it might well have sank without trace. But when you ban something, people get curious, and they had it imported from outside the country. We move on to the 1950s. In the 1950s, the law is still very negative. People were still imprisoned, but some people given a choice. Go to jail or take the treatment. That is the treatment they offered you at the time. They cut bits of your brain out. They gave you chemical castration or electric shock treatment. Those treatments are still going on today in this country. 6 years ago, the Conservatives said they would ban these treatments. They didn't. The current government have said they will ban these treatments. All I can say is, well, get on with it. Somebody who was affected by this is here. Who is he?
Alan Turing.
Alan Turing. Now, when I showed this 25 years ago, it was very rare for anybody to know about Alan Turing. These days, more and more people do. He's on the back of the £50 note. He is a well-known figure, a relatively well-known figure. But for those who are not familiar with Alan Turing, I will give a brief summary of his importance. At the start of the Second World War, Winston Churchill asked Turing to form a team at Bletchley Park that would be working on code breaking. And Turing and his team cracked the German Enigma code, the second Enigma code, the one that was more complicated. What this meant was that the British now knew where the German submarines were and where they were heading. Because prior to that, German submarines had sank literally hundreds of British and Allied ships. The knowledge was extremely important. Churchill said that by his work, Turing and his team shortened the Second World War by at least 2 years. What was his reward? In 1952, he was arrested as a gay man and told, go to jail or take the treatment. He chose the treatment. And after 2 years, he was so depressed by the chemical castration, he took an apple, injected it with cyanide, bit into it and killed himself. Some people say the apple with a bite out of it Is Turing's link to the Apple company? Some people say that that's a myth. Up to you to find out that. Well, we know about Turing. You don't know about Terry, who is a friend of mine. In the 1970s, Terry was married with 2 small children, but he came out as gay to his family. His family said, "You need to see a doctor." He went to his doctor. The doctor drove him to Mikolova Psychiatric Hospital, where a course of electric shock treatment was recommended. He had a nervous breakdown. His children were taken away from him. Well, we're back in the early 1950s, and in the early 1950s, gay men were tarnished by association with the gay Cambridge spies, Burgess and Maclean, who gave state secrets to the Russians and then fled the country for Russia. Another person that was affected by the negative atmosphere was Sir John Gielgud. So John Giel was arrested for cottaging. If you don't know what cottaging is, it'll come up later on. But he was arrested for cottaging. He went to court, he gave a false name. But there was a reporter in the court who recognised him, and the reporter wrote an article in his newspaper. And the day that the article came out, Sir John Giel was to perform on the stage. He was terrified. He went on stage and he was met with a round of applause. A lot of the general public were less concerned about these issues than tabloid newspapers. But here's a story that hit the headlines. The Montague trial. Lord Montague of Bewley and 2 of his friends, William Pitt Rivers and Peter Wildblood, were imprisoned for homosexual acts. This was in the news. And I don't know, but it might have been a lever for the government taking action. Because in 1954, they set up the Wolfenden Committee. There's Sir John Wolfenden. And they set up this committee to look at the possibility of changing the law on homosexuality, but also on prostitutes and prostitution. So here's the question, Scott. What is a packet of Huntley and Palmer's biscuits doing in this context? Well, apparently, some of the committee were so embarrassed by the constant reference to homosexuals and prostitutes, they call homosexuals Huntleys and prostitutes Palmers. I will have a quick swig of water to get by this point. Now, already you have realised that there are so many of these penalties and punishments and negative attitudes of society that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of queer or LGBT plus people stay firmly in the closet. They are hidden away. And because of that, people in authority can say the most absurd things about people like me, and they will be believed because people wouldn't stand up and counter them. Here are some of those things that those people in authority said. Their first and third fingers are always the same length. Doesn't work for me. You may try it out if you wish. Do it at home. Here's another one. They are usually colourblind. Rubbish. They cannot sing in tune. Tell that to the Singing Proud choir in Nottingham. Here's one of my favourites. They like the company of ladies with large bosoms. Where does that come from? Now the next one, I have to say before I am not making this up.
Oh no.
So useful when you lose the bottle opener. I don't think so. We laugh at these. We don't laugh at that one. These are the things that were said, and many more. Well, the law did change in 1967. If a consenting male adult in private, things were a bit better. In the House of Lords, the law change was introduced by Lord Arran. At the same time, he wanted to introduce a law to protect badgers, and he was asked, "Tell me, Lord Arran, why was it that your law on homosexuality was successful, but your law on badgers failed?" His answer was, "Not many badgers in the House of Lords." Well, we've looked at the adult bit. What about the privacy bit? Here are 4 situations, and I want you to think about what would you answer if you were asked to pick one of those 4 things that would still be illegal after the 1967 Act. Would it be A, B, or C, or D? I'll give you a few seconds to think about the one that you would choose. So you mentally choose the one that you would pick. Now, if you pick B, you will be right, because sex in public lavatories was an offence and it's still an offence. But if you'd picked A, C or D, you would also be right. They are all illegal for gay men under the 1967 Act. They could never have legal sex in a hotel bedroom. And then I put, what about public sex? Well, let's be honest, if people haven't got a place of their own, they will find a way. But it is true that gay men have always been punished more heavily than heterosexuals. Here's an example from the year 2005. That is significant. A man and a woman were arrested after they were reported for having sex in a crowded railway train. In the same month, a couple of gay men were arrested for having sex at night in the woods. Here are the fines. The heterosexual couple, £50. The gay men, £1,000. What is more, the couple in the railway train were only reported and arrested because they lit up a cigarette in a no-smoking compartment. Well, you had those in 2005. Okay, so if you're a consenting male adult in private, the sex is legal, but getting there may be illegal. Look at the men in the circle. Let us say those two men are doing what is sometimes called chatting each other up. They are chatting each other up with the prospect of ending up in bed a few hours later. But the chatting up is illegal for gay men because they are importuning in a public place for immoral purposes. So there was an issue. And what I've been talking about only applies to England and Wales. Scotland had to wait 13 years for the law to change. Northern Ireland, 15 years. You might imagine that after 1967, the arrests for gross indecency would fall. Nothing was further from the truth. They rose dramatically. A lot of chief constables, a lot of police officers did not like the change in the law, and they went out of their way to entrap gay men. They used the pretty police. Young, casually dressed police officers who stand about in public lavatories waving their willies around. And if anybody came up to them, they'd say, "You're nicked, my lad." An easy way to boost police and arrest and conviction figures. Well now, after the 1967 Act, which was one small step, there were a huge number of negative legal issues that still remain. I'm going to flag up 6 statements, and I want you to think of whether they were true or false after 1967. Here's the first one. Could a hotel turn away same-sex couples in 1967? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right, well done. What about this one then? Could you be arrested for holding hands in public? Yes.
Yes.
You could. What I'm going to say you will not believe. Some gay men were arrested for smiling at each other. I'm not making it up. What about this one? Could you be banned from seeing your seriously ill partner in hospital? Yes, you could. Happened to me in 1978. And the reason for this is that you are not next of kin. At that time, any relationship you were in had no legal standing whatsoever. What about this one? Could you be sacked simply for being gay or lesbian?
Yes.
Many examples. Well, I'll give you the next one because it's another next of kin issue. Yes, you could be banned from going to your partner's funeral. And here's the last one. If you were getting a divorce and there was a custody battle for children and you're outed as gay or lesbian, would you lose custody of your children? I think you've got the idea now. The answer, of course, is yes. I was told by legal friends in the 1970s there were no exceptions at all. It was automatic. You lost custody of your child. Here's an example. There's somebody I know, Carol Taylor, in a demonstration in 1975. She is the big gay pride butterfly. In 1975, she was forming a relationship with a woman called Bernice Humphreys, who was going through a custody battle. Bernice had 3 young sons. The judge said, "Never in my lifetime will I allow a lesbian to retain custody of a child." They were taken away from her. Fortunately, the story has 2 happy endings. The first happy ending took place about 3 months later. having had 3 months of looking after 3 very boisterous young sons, the husband turned up at Bernice's door and said, "I can't cope, you better have them." So she got her sons back. And the second happy ending was, after 50 years, Bernice and Carol are still together. Hooray for them. There they are. Being sacked for being gay. Tony Whitehead worked for British Home Stores. He took part in the documentary. The management of British Home Stores saw the documentary and said, "You're sacked because you are bringing our organisation into disrepute." Well, I now introduce April Ashley. April Ashley was probably the first transgender woman that people in this country got to know about. In the 1950s, she was quite well known as a model and she appeared in some films. In 1961, she was outed as transgender by the People newspaper. She was one of the first people in this country to go through full gender reassignment or gender confirmation surgery. In 1963, she got married. In 1970, the marriage was on the rocks, so they went for a divorce. But in so many words, the judge said, "You, April Ashley, have never been married because you are a man." That judgment hung over transgender people for many years. Here's another very disturbing case, the case of John Saunders. John Saunders worked in a holiday camp. He was an odd job man. He replaced light bulbs, he changed fuses, he did general cleaning. His employers were told that he was gay. They said, "You are gay, that means you're a danger to children, so you're sacked." He took his case to an employment appeals tribunal. They said, "We are well aware that the idea that gay men are automatically a danger to children is nonsense. But because the general public believe it to be true, we will uphold your dismissal." We are now in the 1980s. In the 1980s, there were a large number of invented articles in newspapers intended to demonise queer people, swept along by a tide of AIDS hysteria. This is the biggest of them. It's about a book called Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin. That sort of headline was what you saw in The Sun and the Daily Mail. They went on to say children as young as 5 are being forced to read this filth and are being encouraged into homosexual practice. Well, brace yourself, because here comes the disgusting pornography. And there's a typical page from the book. Eric's Jenny's dad, he's divorced, he now lives with Martin, and the book shows the sort of thing that Jenny does in this same-sex household. There she is playing a game. Turn the page, she's riding a tricycle. Turn the page, she's in the garden, and so it goes on. What is more, no child was ever given this book. There was one copy in a London teachers' centre for use by teachers only. Never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. These stories, particularly this one, were the introduction, the lever for the introduction in 1988 of Section 28 of the Local Government Act, the one that tried to prevent the promotion of homosexuality. Well, after 1968, yes, it was after 1967, it was one small step in terms of making things better, particularly for gay men. But there are all these areas of legal discrimination that remained, and the Conservative added Section 28. Nothing changed for 33 years. It was only from 2000 onwards that things gradually improved bit by bit. Let's have a look at them. The first thing to go was the ban on LGBT plus people in the armed forces. The second was the equalisation of the age of consent. Now, in 1994, under John Major, the Conservatives did decrease the age of consent from 21 to 18. So in 2001, it went down from 18 to 60. Does anybody have any questions about that slide? Anything that piques your curiosity, shall I say? Out with it.
Cows.
What are the cows? What are the upside down cows doing then? I will tell you. The Morton Christian Association said that the 2001 outbreak of foot and mouth disease Was God's revenge for lowering the age of consent? What I want to know is, why did God take it out on the cows? Should the RSPCA have been informed? The wretched Section 28 went over 20 years ago. The lack of job security went over 20 years ago. April Ashley, in 2004, got a new birth certificate that said female. This is not easy. You have to convince a gender recognition panel. One of the things you have to do is to live it for at least 2 years as a member of the opposite sex. It does not recognise non-binary people. As I say, it's a very complex process. The government have said they will simplify it. We wait to see what happens. The gross indecency laws were removed from the statute book in 2004. Problems remain. The law has gone, but there are thousands of gay men who have criminal records for something that is now no longer an offence. Generally, they will be older people. A lot of older people volunteer. They go along to where they want to volunteer and they have a DSB check, and the criminal record comes back and they're told to go away. As far as I know, the only person who has been publicly pardoned is Alan Turing, pardoned by Gordon Brown. So there is an issue. The law has gone, the criminal records remain. As far as I'm concerned, this was the big one. There's Nottingham's first civil partnership, Jenny Hudson and Jackie Chapman. Because what this did at a stroke was to sweep away all those next of kin issues. Your association, your relationship now has legal standing. The hotels that said no, the restaurants that said no, can't do it after the amendment to the Goods and Services Act. You then have the Grand Equality Act in 2010. The icing on the cake, you can now put the word married to your relationship. There's a question, does being married provide an advantage over civil partners? In this country, very little, practically nothing. But beware if you are travelling outside this country, because there are some countries that will recognise your relationship if it's got the word married attached to it, but not if it's got civil partnership. Do check. So, nearly all those things, those areas of legal discrimination, have now gone or been substantially modified. But still, lots of issues remain. Young people thrown out by their parents will be looking at that fairly soon. The criminal records that remain, rising levels of hate crimes. And if you suffer those things, it leads to stress, and stress leads to mental illness, and some people, to relieve the stress, turn to drugs and alcohol. Have the media stopped stereotyping people? Oh, you must be joking. And so it goes on. And that's us. That's the rest of the world. The spots are where they do nasty things to you, and the black spots are where they kill you. And that map is out of date, because President Museveni of Uganda has added another black spot. Bear that in mind, because some of the people that you meet, some of the people that you work with, possibly now, possibly in the future, will have come from those spotty places. And their idea about how society and the law will protect them, or not as the case may be, may well have been formed from their country of origin. That may be a barrier you have to overcome in the future. Okay, we'll have a look at homophobia, biphobia and transphobia. And if you were asked to give some examples, well, I want you to think about what you would say if you were going to give examples of the nasty, the unpleasant things that the homophobes, the biphobes, the transphobes do to their victims. I'll just give you a few seconds to think about it, get it clear in your mind. It's really just I want to drink of water. Well, I expect you would have thought of some of these. The name calling, the beating up, the cyber abuse in these days, social media, and other things there. What about the frequency? These are the police statistics. Compare 2011 with 2021. There is a 6-fold increase in these hate crimes? The police will say, is the increase because the hate crimes are going up, or is the increase because people are more ready to report these hate crimes? Now let's be clear, LGBT plus people, queer people, whatever you call them, have a very negative history with the police. I've given some examples in the past. Exactly the same with African and Caribbean people. We have negative histories. We don't trust the police. We are reluctant to report. If we report a homophobic crime, we have got to come out to them and tell them, yes, I'm gay, I'm lesbian. And some people don't want to do that. So, yes, it is true, the police are making efforts to increase our trust. So when they say, is it one or the other? No, surely the answer is both. The trust is increasing, there is more reporting, but also the crimes are going up. And the question is why? I can think of two reasons, you may be able to think of more. One of the reasons, which I'm sure you're aware of, is that these days a lot of politicians are using things under the heading of equality and diversity, and that includes queer issues, LGBT plus issues, as political footballs. They want scapegoats. It's useful for these politicians to have scapegoats. And LGBT plus people, queer people, are one of these scapegoats. And that incites certain people in the population to take a negative action. But another reason, this is my own personal reason, you may disagree, if you look at 2015-16, it really starts to take off after that. What happened in 2016? The vote for Brexit. And this is my opinion, that when Brexit came along, it brought out what I would call a lot of little Englanders who say, if you're not like us, go away, we want nothing to do with you. That's my opinion, it might be wrong. There are 5 columns with sexual orientations and gender statuses, if that's the word, at the top of them. One of the things that was mentioned in these hate crimes was name calling. Here's another mental exercise for you. I want you to imagine that you were given that as a piece of paper and you asked to write down all the derogatory, unpleasant terms that you could think of that went under those 5 headings. I'm not going to ask you to say them, I'm not going to ask you to write them down, I am going to ask you to think about them. And I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about what you could write down in those 5 columns. Your thinking time starts now. Right, here's the question. Which of those columns would you find it easiest to put derogatory terms under? Would somebody like to say?
Gay. First.
Probably gay. When I've asked this, it's nearly always been gay. On one occasion it was transgender. But gay or transgender, you can put some down the other. Which one would you find it hardest to populate? And that would almost certainly be straight. And this is the point. When you come to name calling, it is the majority that does the name calling against any minority. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, ethnic minorities, disabled people, people who are overweight, people who who've got red hair. Now, I am slightly deaf, so if you're going to talk to me, imagine you're on the stage of the National Theatre and you are...
I was going to say that even by saying straight, you are then kind of like...
I can't hear, I'm sorry.
By saying straight, you're then like inferring that the rest is like bent or like wrongly...
You'll have to come here.
You got a mic?
Yes. I'm not sure how well this works, but please give it a go. Oops. Sorry.
No? Yeah? Can you hear it?
No.
Yeah, please come to the front if you don't mind.
I was just going to say that when we write like straight, it kind of says that the alternative being gay or whatever, you're bent, like you're something that's not.
Oh yes, people, a lot of people do not like to use the word straight, and of course what you've got there are 5 terms. There are many terms that we can use. You could go the full quilt bag sound popper, you know, queer question on this island is lesbian, trans, bisexual, gay, homosexual, homosexual, and trans, and there are more. So, yes, I'm not saying I approve with the use of the word straight, but it is in general usage. So, there we are. We move on, but I want to amplify this by looking at the Allport scale of prejudice. Because what Allport does is to look at how the majority exerts prejudice against any minority. So yes, again, it is the lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgender, but it's also the ethnic minorities, the disabled people, as I said, the people who are overweight, the people with red hair, any minority. And Allport starts off by giving a fancy name to that thing we know well. It is the name calling. And if you ask the name callers why they're doing it, they will say, it's just a joke. It's just a bit of fun, not if you're on the receiving end day after day. Well, the most important thing that Allport says is if you don't deal with and clamp down on this low-level stuff, things progressively get worse, and he shows how. Ignore the name-calling, and you get avoidance. The majority pushes the minority to one side, it excludes them. If you ignore that, you get active discrimination. Now, of course, in this country we do have laws that are intended to prevent that. Sometimes they work, occasionally they don't. But if people try to get around it and they are caught in this country, there are heavy fines. In some countries, no problem at all. If that's ignored, you move on to the physical side. People get beaten up and so on. If that's ignored, well, if you experience these things on a daily basis, the suicide rates for LGBT people, particularly transgender people, are shocking. If you go around beating people up, sometimes it tips over into murder. And of course, in some countries, the whole thing is carried out in the name of the state. Genocide in Rwanda, genocide in the Ottoman Empire, and of course, most notoriously under Nazi Germany, where the Nazis killed the Jews and they killed the Gypsy Roma people, they killed the LGBT people, they killed the trade union activists, they killed disabled people, people with learning difficulties, and so it went on. So when the people at the bottom say, oh, it's just a joke, well, actually, it's not. I want to look at this and look at the issue of being stuck in the closet or coming out. And there are two words here, heterosexism and heteronormativity. They are related, they have similarities. Essentially, it's saying that our society assumes that everybody is heterosexual and things work along those lines. And so sometimes people ask this question, why do you have to come out? Why? Well, here's somebody that was asked that question, the baseball player Jason Collins, who came out as gay a few years ago, and he was asked it by this other athlete, Asante Samuel. He says, straight people aren't announcing they're straight, so why does everybody have to announce their sexuality or whatever? You don't have to show it and flaunt it like that. Well, the point is that because of heterosexism and heteronormativity, Asante Samuel is assumed to be heterosexual, and he is. So, of course, he doesn't have to announce it. He has come out by way of society. Here's an exercise for you, another thinking exercise. Imagine that you're going to meet up with a friend of yours, perhaps over a cup of coffee, and you are going to talk about your last holiday, where you went, who you went with, the activities, the places that you visited, the things that you did, all those sort of things. And I want you to think for a few seconds, I'll give you about 30 seconds thinking time, what you would say to your friend describing your last holiday. Your thinking time starts now. Okay, thinking time is up. You meet with your friend. You're going to talk about your holiday, but there are conditions. And these are the conditions. You cannot mention husbands, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, and children, or where you socialise. Now, I have to admit, for younger people here, we may not have got to the situation of wives and boyfriends and children and husbands and so on. For some of you, there will be girlfriends and boyfriends, but for the older people here, the question is, are there things that you wanted to say that you can't say anymore? And for many people, the answer will be yes. Because you have been put in the position of, shall we say, a lesbian who is in the closet. Because if you're in the closet, you cannot mention personal things, because it gives the game away. You cannot mention your partner. So you are perpetually 24 hours a day on guard, being careful about what you say. Think about the effect it has on your mental health. Think about the effect it has on your personal self-image. You are ashamed. You have to keep these things hidden. Think about how you come across to your colleagues. If you don't talk about those things, they think you've got no social life. It's at the end of the year, it's a Christmas party, they say, come along, bring your partner. Can't do that. The easiest thing is not to go. That's some of the things that happen if you're stuck in the closet. And you can understand why people would much prefer to come out. But we'll explore that in more detail now, because now you are all going to come out, but you're going to come out at the age of 16, easier for some people than others. So I want you to go back to when you were 16 and hold 4 facts in your mind. And the first fact, think of the name of a good friend that you had when you were 16. If you had somebody called a best friend, that's the ideal. Think of the name of a good friend and hold that person's name in your mind. There's the first thing. Think of a place you used to go when you were 16 to meet your friends. You were probably at school. It might be a school group or society. It might be a coffee bar. It might be a sports group. It might be the shopping mall. It might be the house of a friend or relation. But hold that in your mind, a place you used to go when you were 16 to meet your friends. The third thing, think of the person in your family you got on best with when you were 16. It might be close family. It might be wider family. It might be sort of pseudo-family. I'll tell you what I mean. I used to have 2 aunts. And they weren't aunts, but we called them aunts. We classed them as part of the family. So the name of the person you used to get on best with in your family when you were 16. And finally, an ambition you had for the future. You're 16. Your future is ahead of you. It might be academic. I want to study this. It might be a job. It might be travel. It might be sport. Some ambition that you had for the future when you were 16. Right, those 4 facts are in your brain. We move on. You meet up with your best friend. You say, have you got a minute, because there's something I want to talk about? Yeah, okay. And you say, well, actually, it's confidential. How are you with that? Oh, that's fine, don't worry about that. So you say, well, I've been meaning to talk about this for quite a while because, well, actually, I'm gay. And what you hear is, I don't want a filthy queer for a friend. They walk off. You've just lost your best friend. So the following day you think yourself, you'll cheer yourself up and you go along to that place where your friends meet. And as soon as you get there, what you hear, we've heard all about you from what's his name, clear off. So you're no longer welcome in that place where you used to meet your friends, which is very upsetting. And after about a week, the person in your family you got on best with said, what's up? You've been down in the dumps for days, really low as far as I can see. Hope you're not getting depressed. You know what they say, a problem shared is a problem halved. Why don't you get it off your chest? So you do. And it all goes wrong. The family is gathered round. You hear things like, oh, we can't let the neighbours find out about this. Or if your grandmother hears, it'll kill her. Or, we can't have people like you in our family. So a couple of hours later, there you are. You are seated on a park bench with a small suitcase and a few pounds in your pockets. They've chucked you out. Does this happen? Here are some recent statistics. One from just over 10 years ago, a big survey. They found that nearly 1 in 10 of young LGBT people had to leave their homes because of these problems. In 2017, the Lib Dems estimate there were over 10,000 homeless the LGBT people. In 2021, the Albert Kennedy Trust made it very clear it is the process of coming out that is the thing that usually leads to people being chucked out. And Stonewall, their survey shows that for queer people in their lifetime, 20% at one time or another will be made homeless. It is not a rare occurrence. Okay, I'm going to throw this in. I usually do something like this in the trade title, so it does no harm to throw this in. Some simple ideas. The organisation must come out. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that any organisation should not wait until somebody comes out to them to start doing something. They need to lay the groundwork beforehand. And how can they do it? Well, one way is through visibility or imagery. What do I mean by this? Well, for example, are there things in your literature? Are there things on your website? If I walk around where you work or where you study, are there notices on the wall? Do any of these things say that I exist and people like me exist and your policies are positive? There is one thing. Explicit, not explicit, not implicit. In other words, don't hide things under very generalised diversity statements. Include the words and explain them. Challenge homophobia, biphobia and transphobia. That's easier said than done. It is hard. I'm going to give you one example, and this is from West Bridgeford School. And there it is. That is their equality agreement. The details are down the middle. All very sensible. Around the outside you have the 9 protected characteristics. They're all there, none more important than the others, nothing missed out. And this was established by work with the students, with the staff and the ancillary staff and the parents. Everybody worked on this. But here is the thing that I think really makes it important. This document is on the wall in every room in the school. You can't get away from it. It is always there. Imagine a teacher hearing a racist comment. The teacher can point to that and say, no, that is our policy. That is what we believe in. I will hear no more of that. You can see me afterwards. I'm my teacher voice now. So there we are then.
I just wanted to add, I actually went to that school, and at the start of every academic year we had to sign that with our name.
Yes, you went to Westwood. Well, as I say, I use that very frequently. It is an extremely good and very useful model. So yes, thank you for that. And that is the end of the first part. We will now have a break.
Yep.
And there's plenty of time for the break. As I say, if during the break you want to have a look at these newsletters, or possibly pass them around, and I've got a form here to sign up for the newsletter. So it is break time now, and other goodies are being given out as well. So
Yes, we also have some leaflets of LGBT vocabulary designed by University of Nottingham staff and students. You're welcome to take a copy or multiple copies. At the same time, we have some QR codes for students on the gender sexuality media students to scan, and we also have a survey for everybody to scan. So this event is supported by LGBT History Month at University of Nottingham. And of course, we want these funding, those projects to continue. So please complete the survey. So let's take a 10-minute break and come back at about 12 o'clock.
I'll put the sign up for everybody else.
Yes, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just slide that box down. Yeah. Hello, I knew Meg, Bob told me, and then I've got the landlady now, so they can see me. This is Friday. How are you? How are you?
Yes. That's life.
Great first talk. Thanks very much.
The second half will be shorter, so at the end we'll have questions.
Sounds good.
We'll have to walk around.
Well, in fact, just now it hasn't worked, but I tested. Testing. So it's slightly better. So I think I will be using this in the Q&A. Yeah, sounds good. Yes, I agree. Yeah, those interactive questions are great. I like those exercises. Yeah, the toilet is either upstairs or downstairs.
My clinic will be when you start on the 11th of October.
Start your own company?
Yeah, I know. It's probably like 2.5 months in. Yeah. I know. But yeah, I saw Mark and she said, something about something about it. And I said, well, I need your stuff, Jackie, because Brian needs to go to that thing. Yeah, I think and then when I realised I was late, I was like, oh, I can't. Are you going to work after? Yeah, good. Good, okay. They changed my hair and they told me about it and they found he's the manager of the
Really good. Hi.
Right, okay.
Are there being any sign-ups? Yeah. I'll be passing around.
So
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to. Well, leave the audience evening. I will answer the question. Nice. That's exactly the question I have in mind. So remember one of your talks has a title, not in the center of the queer universe.
well, that's what the teacher's coming on.
Okay, looking forward.
Yeah, he's 30. Maybe 30.
The school sounds really good. I'm really envious.
Great to see because I saw it and I was like, where do I recognize that from? The secondary school I went to. So like at the start I had that finance and then if anything happened to do with anybody being racist or any kind of issues, they would come to a meeting and be like, yeah, you said you wanted to do this.
It's a good practice. I hope every school will have that practice.
It's New York.
I mean, found it. Curriculum is very complicated, but once you know it, it's fine. Last chance to scan the QR code for students. We still have a couple of minutes, so don't worry. This is just the time to scan the QR code. So if you're a student in the class, this is the one. And for everybody, please complete the feedback form if you can. Yes, it is recorded. Yeah, I will be sharing the recording also. Yes. It's different. Yeah, I'll be asking you later to share the location. I will have the location. Thank you. You're welcome. Have you scanned the QR code?
Oh, no, I haven't got that already. I have given it for a
Okay.
Yeah, can you write it down?
No, this is a electric
Scan that QR code. I'm sure
I don't know where the...
Okay.
the feedback form is.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't know either, so that probably means we will have to
Yeah, I got that. Why did you? You did ask. And the